Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be taking a break from the norm and I'll be giving you my impressions, or at least first impressions, of The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. I've played this game for a solid 8 hours and I've also got about 20 hours in Witcher 2, so while I've definitely got a long way to go with this franchise, I'm definitely getting there and it's a hell of a lot of fun. My copy of this game was provided, no strings attached, by the publisher of the game, technically for review, but hey, first impressions will do. And this video is, of course, impressions, not a full review. A full review of a massive RPG so quickly would be extremely silly, so take this video with a grain of salt. Firstly though, my overall impressions of the game, or at least the first 8 hours of it, are pretty excellent. Now granted, it's only the first 8 hours of a game that is far larger, but still, hey, it is a very good sign. So, what have I actually been doing in the first hours of the game? Well, first of all, don't worry, I won't be spoiling you as to any plot details, but you start off pretty much right where much of the promotional material ends, and then you continue on from there. The plot does a great job of being interesting, so that's pretty much all good, and of course, it's great to hear Charles Dance when he actually does end up appearing. It's not a spoiler, he was in the trailer, and I was kind of excited to hear his voice work, which is surprisingly good. Often we do see big actors come into games and then do a terrible job, but he doesn't appear to have fallen into that category. As far as the gameplay goes, well, this sort of intro section does a great job of teaching you the basics in a manner that's not a complete pain in the arse. Past like an optional swordplay tutorial, you're pretty much just given the buttons and you're left to play around with it for yourself, which is a great way of just learning the game. Of course, being a Witcher, you'll be expected to fight far more than just humans because, if you're not aware, Witchers are professional monster slayers, and fighting monsters is really where I think this game's combat shines. Killing people does, of course, feel really great. Probably too great, because I end up getting myself in fights just for the fun of the combat. Aside from humans though, my first encounter with a massive, like a truly massive creature, was killing a griffin. And what's great about that fight is it actually really got you to learn the attacks of your enemy and get a good feel for the encounter, the timing and various things like that, before you'd actually win. Of course, the enemy also had its own strengths and weaknesses and things like that. I was playing on the third hardest of the 4 difficulties that were available to me. I don't know if there's maybe a 5th unlockable one or anything like that, but what they managed to do is make it feel like I was actually fighting a griffin. Now this is far more than, say, what fighting beasts felt like in Skyrim. Skyrim's already extremely drab combat was hardly helped by the fact that most enemies were just generic hitboxes. Whether it was a mammoth or a bear or a tiger or whatever, it didn't really matter that much. Here though, you really do feel like you're fighting a griffin, and that is a very, very cool feeling, and it backs up the idea of you being a monster slayer. It really makes that core monster slayer sort of fantasy work very well. I also fought some smaller monsters like ghouls, drowners, and harpies. They all felt really different to fight, and they required different strategies to kill them, which, of course, was very nice. Humans, though, are a bit less varied. You get enemies with swords, shields, axes, bows, spears, and really the standard affair. Though fighting humans, or well, fighting anything, but especially humans, is really a case for me of divide and conquer. You need to be careful with your positioning and various things like that, or else you will be just mauled to pieces. And that is good. It feels tactical, which is, I think, key to a game like this. Overall, I'd say the combat is one of the game's greatest strengths so far. I can imagine it getting better and better as more abilities unlock, assuming they're more balanced, because hopefully that would add a bit more depth. I'm currently quite a low level, so I don't have a lot of stats put into the various abilities and things like that that are available for your upgrades. Now, in terms of specifics, well, the swordplay is your standard sort of light attack and heavy attack affair, though Geralt is very athletic, and that makes the combat feel really fast-paced and fluid, which is great. And at the same time, the game does retain a very good sense of weight, and because of the timings of the various attacks and how they play into your enemies' animations and things like that, well, timing is a very key skill in this game. You can also block with your sword, and further to that, a well-timed block will initiate a counterattack, which allows you to slip in a few extra slices. It definitely doesn't suffer from Assassin's Creed problems, though, where it's just kind of, block and then counterattack and insta-kill. The only thing that your block does is kind of stun your enemy a little bit and allow you to get a few slices in. It is in no way a big insta-kill. As far as other things go, you've got positioning, which is extremely important, I've found. Anytime that you fail in your positioning, you just get swamped and mauled, which is definitely a very good thing. I think combat should definitely have sort of penalties to playing badly. And when we're talking about positioning and things like that, it's time to mention the defensive abilities, which are your roll and your dodge, with the dodge being the smaller of the two movements. Your roll is fast and it allows you to have great control over your positioning on the battlefield. It's absolutely key to playing the game in my experience, and it's definitely worked out quite well. You've also got a magic system, and so far it seems to be very similar to that of Witcher 2, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a very good thing. It weaves into the pacing of the swordplay very well, and the tactical use of your magical abilities is definitely a key to success. Especially Quen. Use Quen, seriously, that shield is really good. Basically, right now you've got 5 different magical signs. There's a Fire Blast, a Telekinetic Push, a Magic Trap, a Mind Trick, and then your shield. There may be more, I'm not 100% sure, but it is quite early on into the game. The way it works is you can choose one of them, which is bound by default to Q on your keyboard, and they can actually be changed in combat by opening up a little selector wheel thingy. Oh, and I've also got a small single-handed crossbow that's really useless in regular combat, but if you're fighting flying enemies, like say those harpies, it's really useful for grounding them, which is kind of cool. You can also fight on horseback in this game, which I think is new from the other ones. Doing so confers a really massive bonus to your damage, but it's not something that you'll be able to fully rely on. If your horse is surrounded to the point where its fear meter is full, then he'll just throw you off and leg it and you could get mauled there. Still though, it is great just riding in on your horse for a few early slashes. Whenever you approach an enemy with your sword drawn, essentially the game slows down a little bit so that you can time the slash. This is really powerful, and it allows you to almost never miss a mounted strike. So I don't know if that's overpowered or not, but certainly it is quite fun. But I can imagine that against groups of tougher enemies, you won't really be able to use your horse that much, so it doesn't sound like a massive overall balance issue. I'd say that the combat so far is a ton of fun though. It's great to see stuff that's properly punishing, at least on the current difficulty level that I'm playing at. So all's good in the combat front. I should probably also mention the character progression though, so here goes. The game's leveling and ability system is a bit of a twist on the standard kind of level up and get an ability point way of doing things. Whenever you get an ability point, you can spend it in a few different areas. You've got magic, combat, alchemy, and general, which just covers, well, some general things. Whenever you get or use a point, you unlock an ability, and each ability's got 5 levels, and putting subsequent points into an ability just gives you an incremental upgrade. I'm not sure if at the very end, so when you unlock 5 out of 5 of an ability, whether that will give you something special, but basically, whenever you unlock an ability, you just drag it into an ability slot. And you've got 4 groups of 3 ability slots, though only one of those groups is currently unlocked to me. Now, beside those skill slots, you see a larger slot. That's a mutagen slot, and you, oddly enough, can put mutagens in these. These essentially, so far, just seem to give you a big stat bonus, and what you'll notice in the video is that my combat abilities are red, while my mutagen is green. If you actually color match those, then your mutagen will grant you additional benefits, but, well, I don't have anything that's matching currently. You can also craft gear, potions, and other things like that, and the crafting system just makes a lot of sense so far, and it's pretty decent, though I'm not into any super advanced stuff. If I'm honest, it's not the most compelling part of the game so far. I'm less interested in the stats, and I'm more interested in the fun movement of the combat and things like that. So with Geralt's levels covered, it's probably worth mentioning that enemies in the world have also got levels. Now this has got some pros and some cons. Of course, it means that you're always able to sort of stumble across enemies that are of a higher level than you when you're initially progressing through the game, and fighting things above your level isn't necessarily impossible or really that hard, unless they significantly outlevel you. It's more about being skilled at the combat and trying not to die. And it's not really the situation where, say, in an MMO, if you fight something of a higher level, that it just out-DPSs you and you're dead. That doesn't really happen. So it's definitely good for making the world, as you progress, feel threatening. However, sometimes it does have the side effect of creating a situation where you would have a simple enough to fight enemy that is otherwise of a higher level, that therefore it feels like a bit of a sack of meat that just takes a while to kill. But I'd say that overall the leveling system so far is well balanced and feels pretty good, though that is of course only within my original kind of like 8 hours of playing the game. Now, one of the things that's really different about this game as opposed to the other Witcher games is that it's set in an open world. And, well, it's a pretty cool open world, I've got to say. As far as I can tell, you've got a number of regions on the map which you can go to, and that does seem to be expanding over time. Initially, there was only a few regions on the map, now there's one or two more. I'm not 100% sure on the overall size of the world or anything like that, but it does seem to feel pretty big at the minute. Within each parent location, you get a really massive area to explore, and that's really what I want to focus on here. So I'm currently wandering around, essentially the places surrounding a place called Novigrad, and it is very cool. It's kind of like an overall just a no man's land. There's some foresty stuff, some marshes, and it's definitely quite pretty. And what's interesting is that there are loads of settlements, loads of tasks and side quests and things to do, and so far most of my gameplay has just been following the main quest and doing the odd side quest just here and there to get some experience. These side quests have actually been very solid though. They're fully voice acted affairs, and based on what I can tell, they all seem to have like decently interesting characters and a bit of a kind of unique sort of hand touch on them. They really feel like they've been crafted like a person, unlike say some of the stuff that popped up in maybe Skyrim's Radiant quest system where it was like, hey kinsman, go kill X amount of Y in this place. So far, the side quests do feel pretty good. Often they involve solving like a problem for somebody, and that really does a lot of the time boil down to using Witcher sense, aka Eagle sense, aka Bat vision, aka, you know, press L3 to see the world through a slightly hazy view that highlights things for you. And it's actually not that bad. You go around the place finding clues, and the clues lead you to whatever the problem is with the person's quest. They have all been fun so far, these quests, and often they do seem to involve some sort of moral choice, which is nice to see, especially since it's not always that kind of BioWare 100% black and white Paragon and Renegade thing. That's definitely good to see. What will be interesting to see, though, is if these side quests end up mattering other than just being a source of experience and gold. It's kind of hard to know at this point, but what I can say is that they have been enjoyable so far. Oh, and sometimes you do get more benefits than just some coin. For an example, in return for helping out a blacksmith, I got reduced prices at his forge. Little things like that I think are excellent rewards for making side quests kind of matter to people. That's good to see. Anyway, back onto the topic of the world itself, it does seem to be quite scattered, and there's various things that you sort of stumble across on your travels, like NPCs, maybe a big bear to hunt, and different things like that. There's also a fast travel system in the game that's got many different nodes. I can see this being a feature that some people will love and others will just pretend it doesn't exist, but since you have a horse, the regular travel really is quite manageable, and I've never found getting around the world to be a source of any actual annoyance. Now, what's nice about the design of the current area that I'm in is that it's scaled to the point where it all feels decently real. Unlike with loads of sort of open world games, I don't feel like I've just been thrown into a theme park. The overall density of the world is, I think, quite important as well. So far, it's striking a great balance between being so dense that it feels like they're just cramming things into a tiny area, and being so large that it feels sparse. It really does hit a good balance between the two. I've also visited a city called Novigrad, mainly just to check out the scale that they were going for with the cities, and, well, based on what I've seen so far, cities are really big in this game, to the point where they actually feel like cities. In so many RPGs, we kind of just get comically small cities, but that does not appear to be the case here. The scale of it all is really impressive, and so far, I'd say this is one of the most believable worlds that I've seen in a game, at least from a visual perspective. And while we're talking about the world, it's definitely worth mentioning the game's graphics. It looks fantastic, even on medium settings. I'm away from my main computer due to some funeral stuff, and I'm having to make do with a GTX 670. The game's running at 60 frames per second on medium settings, and even on medium, the game does look very good. And what's especially nice is they've got this effect where all of the foliage and trees and things like that, they react to the wind how you'd expect it to. Now, that doesn't seem like a massive thing, but when you're just riding around on your horse and there's a storm, it really does make it just feel quite realistic. It's a very nice little touch of detail. Now, the world scale also does help on a graphical front. You get really big landscapes with lots of detail, and I'd say that, like, due to this size, they're able to put in decently sized settlements, decently sized things like farms and stuff like that, and plenty of villages, and that use of scale does make the game's world definitely feel quite real. At least so far. I've only been to one of the main areas and one city, so you know, that could all change in the subsequent zones, but assuming they stay roughly on par with where they are now, then the world is, scale-wise, doing very well. Now, the game's overall aesthetic and graphical design is very much grounded in reality, and that's something that does match the world that they're trying to portray. It's definitely not the nicest of places. Having this realistic slant really does drive home as well the threatening nature of the various monsters and things like that are roaming around the place. For an example, that griffin that I've fought. In World of Warcraft, griffins are these kind of proud, majestic, almost beautiful creatures, whereas here they are, like, they're pretty scary looking things, and having all of that just be grounded in a world that's really quite believable and realistic is great for the effect that all those monsters and various beasties have. So, both the fidelity and the direction of the visuals are extremely impressive, and I just cannot wait to see more of this world, especially the bits to the far north and the Skellig Islands, which are kind of a rugged coastal sort of area, because I kind of love that terrain. And I definitely want to see this maxed out on my 3440 by 1440p, 21 by 9, 34-inch monitor, and 2 GTX 980s that's like all maxed, because I can imagine that this game looks truly stunning on a setup like that, especially with that monitor. Right now, I'm playing it on a 670 medium settings on a 24-inch non-IPS monitor, so the colors don't really pop, and I don't feel like it's doing the world justice. Still, it's better quality than the consoles at the very least, but I definitely want to see this on a setup that I think can really do the game's art direction and overall quality a bit of justice. So perhaps I'll mention that in a future video or do some sort of follow-up when I can. Now, in terms of plot, I'm not really going to talk about any details, but it's just worth mentioning that so far, the characters are very interesting. I like Geralt's story, he's got some interesting personal ties to various people, and the overall just narrative is quite intriguing, even at this early stage. Voice acting across the board does appear to be quite solid as far as, like, I can tell, especially from the side characters and the peasant population. Geralt has his signature voice, and I would imagine that goes down well with some, but a bit less with others. I think it works for his character though, so I'm happy enough. Dialogue is also similar to The Witcher 2 in that you do get some options and things like that, so you know, you could try to trick an enemy using one of your little, your magic things. You could try to threaten an enemy. You get a bit of choice there, and that does dictate how the outcome of some conversations go, which is certainly nice. According to what I've heard, a lot of your choices do have repercussions later on. I have no idea to what degree stuff like that is the illusion of choice or is actual choice, but it seems like things do matter, and that's definitely nice. So that's essentially it for my thoughts on the game so far. It's got great combat, great world, great characters, great story. As far as an RPG goes, what more do you want, I suppose? These are very positive, really, feelings that I'm getting from this game, and that's nice considering the state of current AAA titles, where often you hear about a big game, it gets a big marketing campaign and all the hype, and then the game just ends up being a bit crap, or at least broken in some sort of way. In terms of actual, like, bugs and things like that, I had one crash, but I think that was to do with my recording setup rather than the actual game. So based on my first 8 or so hours with this game, I can definitely recommend it, but take that with a grain of salt that's, I don't know, maybe been thrown on top of a bucket of salt, because it's a very long game, and this is a short slice of the beginning. They could have front-loaded this game to have all the good quality content at the very start. It's impossible to know that. So far, it does seem like the reviews are very positive, so that's definitely heartening. All I can say is, I look forward to playing more of the game. The first 8 hours makes me want to play more, and I suppose make of that what you will. Anyway, that is it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are on the game down in the comments, and I will see you next time.